Okay, guys, just to go through everything very quickly. We have four zones of the reticular formation, okay? The median, the paramedian, the medial, and the lateral, okay? The median has ascending fibers that are for sleep, and they're very they make a lot of serotonin. They have descending fibers that are what? They go to the trigeminal spinal, the dorsal spinal, and they're for pain modulation, okay? So that gait control, analgesic pain. Then we have the paramedian, which sits a little outside. So I've shown these guys right here. Okay, here's the median, the paramedian. This one was the median. The brown was the paramedian. This guy was the medial, and these two are the laterals. Okay. Okay, that's that. The paramedian, it receives input from the dentate, the fastigial, the vestibular nuclei, and the spinal cord, and it projects to the uvula, the vermis, the fastigial nucleus of the cerebellum. Okay. Now, the medial zone, it has ascending fibers via the central tegmental tract that go to the interlaminar nuclei of the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Okay. It also has these descending fibers that give rise to the reticulobulbar and the reticulospinal tract. Okay, which are for controlling of these cranial motor sensory control. Okay. And so they also have these reticulocerebellar fibers that go to the cerebellum. And it also has the paramedian pontine reticular formation of the medial zone, which is going to project to two cranial nerves, one direct and one indirect. So if you come over here, it'll go to cranial nerve 3 and cranial nerve 6. So abducens and oculomotor. It'll go to the abducens nuclei, which would then give projections to the lateral rectus, and then it'll also give projections to the medial longitudinal fasciculus, which will ascend, go to the oculomotor nucleus. Okay, it'll innervate that, and those will go to the medial rectus, and they would cause horizontal eye movements. Okay, and that's with the medial zone. Okay, through the pontine parareticular formation. There's also at the end, at the cranial end, I haven't shown it here, but at the cranial end, there is the rostral interstitial nucleus, which is used for the coordination of vertical eye movements. Okay, I haven't shown it here though. All right, now moving on to the lateral zone. Just to add something real quick, the medial zone are called the magnocellular, and they have very large ascending and descending fibers, very long ascending and descending. The lateral are called parvocellular, right? So parvocellular, because parvis meaning small, okay? So these parvis cellular. And these guys mainly project to the medial zone, but they can also give out to some nearby cranial nerves, okay? So now the lateral zone, it receives these fibers, it receives afferent fibers from the cerebrum, the cranial nerves, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord, okay? One thing to note is that the medial zone is the efferent zone for the most part, and the lateral zone for the most part is the afferent zone. So that's the one that receives all those afferents and sends it to the medial, and the medial zone is really that efferent that gives out a lot of these fibers to a lot of different places for the most part. Okay? Now, the lateral zone has three nuclei that I want you to know, the cuneiform and the pedunculopontine, which are really going out to all the motor systems, right? We'll sort of talk about them a little bit. And then the parabrachial nucleus, which will go to the amygdala, specifically involved in the visceral and limbic functions, okay? That's really all I want you to know about these zones. But also the lateral nucleus, like I told you, the lateral zone also gives us the medial zone, which means it's indirectly contributing to the reticulobulbar and the reticulospinal tract. And because it's given to the reticulobulbar tract, it's going to for the Duchenne smile and the pyramidal smile. Okay, so just to very quickly sort of go through this, we were talking about the median zone, which again these guys have a lot of serotonin, right? So here's the median zone right here, and what's happening? It's going ascending fibers, right? Ascending fibers that go to the thalamus here, and then they go to the cortex, right? And they alert the system about these. It's sleep related, okay? So for sleep related, and that's from the median zone. But it also has descending fibers that go down to Rex lamina 2 in the dorsal spinal cord, right? And therefore pain modulation, okay? Specifically, right? So you can take a look at this. It goes here, but it can also go to the trigeminal spinal tract and the thalamic tract, okay? And yeah, it can cause this sort of pain modulation response. Okay, so that's that. Now let's talk a little bit more about the paramedian. The paramedian zone, right here in brown, you can see it. You remember we had these thermoreceptors and we had C fibers, right? 85% of these C fibers, they would go to the reticular formation, specifically to the paramedian reticular formation. So you can see here, we're getting fibers to the paramedian reticular formation from this guy, from the spinal lemniscus, okay? But we're also getting these from somewhere else. We're getting them from the cerebellum, specifically where? The dentate nucleus and the fastigial nucleus of the cerebellum. If we follow them along, you can see that they go and they synapse right here on the paramedian. We're also getting them from somewhere else. We're also getting them from the vestibular nuclei, specifically the medial vestibular nucleus will come to the paramedian, okay, and it'll innervate that. And then guess what? All of these guys, they have all these efferents. From the paramedian zone, we have efferents going out to three locations: to the fastigial nucleus in the cerebellum, to the vermis of the cerebellum, and to the uvula, right here in the uvula, okay? All right, that covers the paramedian. Now let's talk about the medial zone. The medial zone. The medial zone is very important, guys. Okay, so let's focus on the medial zone here. The medial zone, like I told you, we don't know much of its afferents. What we do know is that it receives these cortico-reticular fibers, right? And they come down from different areas of the the thing. They can come down from the premotor cortex. They can come down from the somatosensory cortex, okay? And those guys will descend down, and they would go to the medial zone, okay? And they would innervate the medial zone. The medial zone will in turn do a bunch of things. So the medial zone, like I said, it does a couple of things, okay? It can take the central tegmental tract and ascend, okay? And it'll go to the hypothalamus, or it could go to the intralaminar nuclei of the thalamus, okay? If it goes to the hypothalamus, what is that going to do? That's going to cause, these projections of the thalamus are used for the control of endocrine functions by the hypothalamic projections to the pituitary gland, okay? What is some other stuff the medial zone can do? The medial zone is the origin of, like I said, the reticulospinal tract, specifically the the medullary reticulospinal tract, which is called the lateral reticulospinal tract, or the pontine reticulospinal tract, which was the medial. Now, these guys will go down into the spinal cord, okay? And you can see that the pontine reticulospinal tract is for both the alpha and the gamma fibers, but the medullary was only for the alpha. Okay, so this pontine reticulospinal tract would inhibit the stretch reflex. Okay, all right, that's that. Now another thing, the rubro-bulbar tract. Sorry, not the reticulobulbar tract would come from the medial zone, and it would go out to the specific cranial nerves, cranial nerve 7, 5, 3, and 6. So facial, trigeminal, oculomotor, and abducens. Okay, and we kind of touched on that right over here, okay, which is a great segue for the next thing. There's a specific nucleus within the medial zone. It's called the paramedian pontine reticular formation in the medial zone. It gives out these fibers that go and go, and they go here. They go to the eyes, okay? They don't actually go to the eyes. Like I told you, they go to the cranial nerve 6, abducens nerve, abducens nerve and cranial nerve 3. We talked about that in the beginning, okay? I'm not going to go over it again. And finally, this lateral zone that we talked about in purple. The lateral zone is what? The lateral zone is a pretty cool guy. It's a pretty cool guy. It receives a lot of information from a lot of places, okay? So it can receive information from the rubro-bulbar tract, specifically what? Those cranial nerve 7 and 5, right? The rubro-bulbar tract, if you guys remember, originated from the red nucleus, okay? That would come in here and it would stimulate the lateral zone. Where else is it receiving information from, guys? From those cortico-reticular fibers, okay? Cortico-reticular fibers, those guys would also influence the lateral zone, okay? So from the cerebrum. But the lateral zone was also receiving information from the cerebellum. Look at this. From the cerebellum, it'll come here to the lateral zone, and it'll innervate the lateral zone. Where else, guys? So it received information from the cerebrum, the cranial nerves, and the cerebellum. One more place, and it's the spinal cord, okay? The spinal cord, if I show right here, the spinal lemniscus is going to come up, and it's going to go to the parabrachial nucleus. This is very important, guys. The parabrachial nucleus is one of the efferents. Where is that going to go? The parabrachial nucleus is going to go to the amygdala. The amygdala was part of the limbic lobe, right? So it was responsible for the visceral and limbic functions. What was another one of those nuclei that I want you to remember in the lateral zone? It was the pedunculopontine and the cuneiform. Those guys both went to the motor systems. Which motor systems? So they would go to the subthalamus, they would go to the substantia nigra, they would go to the putamen, they would go to the caudate, they would go to the globus pallidus, and they would go to the primary motor cortex. Okay? All of these guys. So the motor cortices. Okay? That was the lateral zone. It also gave these fibers out to the medial zone. Okay? And if it did that, what was it going to do? It was going to contribute to the reticulobulbar and reticulospinal tract modulation. So it was for that, that Duchenne and that pyramidal smile. Okay? Now, we didn't talk about this. However, I want you to remember that the amygdala and the hypothalamus also give these fibers to the reticular formation. Okay? What I'm theorizing is that the amygdala will give fibers back to the lateral zone, and the lateral zone would integrate this emotional aspect of the motor response and send it down to these medial zone, and the medial zone would go out into the facial nerve and adjust for the appropriate either Duchenne or pyramidal smile. Duchenne was a genuine smile with the reticular formation on. The pyramidal smile was not with the reticular formation on. Okay, so it wasn't emotion induced. All right, that's why I say the role of the amygdala in this one is pretty big. Okay, guys. Some other things that you should know is that the medial zone, like I said, it gives out these reticulocerebellar fibers that go out to the cerebellum. Okay, but just remember that the cerebellum can send fibers to the reticular formation. From where? Remember those vestigial and the dentate nuclei that went to the paramedian zone? Those guys were called cerebellar reticular fibers. Okay, just want you guys to sort of understand. Last sort of thing that I want you to talk about here is that the cranial nerve 7, 9, 10, okay? These guys will send their general visceral afferent fibers, go to the nucleus of tractus solitarius, and the nucleus of tractus solitarius will send it down to the reticular formation, okay? I don't know which reticular formation, but the reticular formation, okay? And that would be for all these autonomic functions, all right? Again, very quickly, just to tell you, the fibers that go to the interlaminar nuclei, as well as going on the corona radiata and going to these the somatosensory cortex, they would also go to the cingulate gyrus. Okay, they would also go to the cingulate gyrus. I also didn't talk about this, but there's this little structure here called the periaqueductal gray, and from the spinal lemniscus, we give off branches called the spinal mesencephalic tract that go to the periaqueductal gray, and from there we make what's known as the the periaqueductal gray gives fibers down to the reticulospinal tract, okay? I'm sorry. The periaqueductal gray gives fibers to the reticular formation, and then from there, we leave it, and we make the periaqueductal gray is going to cause that going down to the rex lamina 2 by the median, okay? And that's that, all right?